Hi, Wesley Church. My name is Gail Welk. I'm the director of handbells, and I'm here to share with you for our Saturday music devotions. And today I am going to read a story to you. The name of the story is called The Parable of the Littlest Bell. And this story is about a small bell. So that really doesn't feel very good about herself. So here we go, the parable of the littlest bell. Once upon a time, there was a very tiny bell. Very tiny. Not very young, just very tiny. In fact, she was really rather mature. She had been around for some time. She lived alone, and her name was Rosemary. She was a searcher. She didn't know what she should do with her life. She had heard that the main purpose of a bell was to ring to the glory of God. But when she listened to her pitiful little sound, she wondered if she really had anything at all to contribute. At first, she thought that her problem might be that she just hadn't tried hard enough. So one day, when she thought she was completely alone, she rang her clapper as hard and long as she could possibly do. She rang it until her sides ached and her clapper was painfully sore. But all she got for her efforts was laughter from a couple big bells who just happened to pass by. In fact, one of those bells had the nerve to call Rosemary a ding-a-ling. Poor Rosemary. That was it. From then on, Rosemary vowed to be completely silent. And no one else was going to make fun of her. But the longer she was silent, the more depressed she became. Deep inside, Rosemary knew that she was meant to ring. To stifle her ring was to bottle up something very important inside her. But when she rang, her sound seemed pitifully insignificant, such a nothing. One day, Rosemary knew that she would have to go out to get some adjustment for her clapper. She had been feeling peaked for too long. As she ventured forth on her way to the bell factory, she chanced upon an old friend, her old chum, Rachel. "Rosemary," Rachel clanged. "I'm so glad to see you. How have you been?" "Do you want the truth?" groaned Rosemary. "Or are you just asking a polite question?" "Why, the truth, of course." So Rosemary proceeded to pour herself out to Rachel. She was so depressed, tears even came, and those are a real no-no for bells. Discoloration, you know. Finally, after some time, Rachel gathered herself up and said, "Rosemary, I've been in a group that I believe you would like. We call ourselves Heaven's Bells, and we perform for the great ringer in the sky." "You mean God?" Rosemary asked in a hushed voice. "None other," rang out Rachel. "I'm not really into this religion stuff," protested Rosemary. "Still, almost anything might be better than what I'm experiencing now." And so Rachel and Rosemary made a date. Rachel agreed to take Rosemary to Heaven's Bells on Wednesday. When Wednesday came, Rosemary had conveniently forgotten about the date, but Rachel gave her a ring on the phone and reminded her several hours before meeting. Reluctantly, Rosemary went. When she reached the bell-ringing headquarters, Rosemary was sure she had made a serious mistake. There was certainly a motley crew present. Why, some of the bells even had defective clappers and obvious cracks in their bodies. They spent the first part of the meeting listening to one another share some of the disappointments and victories of their week. And then one of them got up and said, "Let's ring." They all rose and began to prepare ringing. It was close to Easter, and so they had decided to ring an Easter tune. Rosemary was amazed when they finally began to ring, even though she could spot faults in almost all of them. When they played together, it was truly beautiful. Only there was still something that seemed missing. Rachel called out to Rosemary, "Do you hear that tiny pause in each verse? That's not supposed to be there. What we are missing is a single, high, clear, clean note that is the climax for each verse to the song of joy. But none of us can hit that note. Would you be willing to try? I think you can do it." At first, Rosemary just shook her clapper, saying to herself, "I know I can't do something that all of them find impossible." But then something inside of her seemed to stir. She remembered some of her dreams when she was young. She felt again that yearning that she had known to do something of tenderness and beauty for the God who had created her and still seemed to love her. She got up and joined the group. They began to play that song again, but this time when they came to the tiny pause, Rosemary gathered up all her courage and rang out for all that she was worth. And the tone that came forth was so clear, so clean, so beautiful that the whole choir paused even an extra second to let it reverberate through them and into heaven. And then as the music continued, Rosemary sensed that something wonderful had happened in her life. She had joined with the other imperfect, hurting, fragile bells to create something of beauty and joy. Through this community, through their faith and love in her, she had found a new song of joy and meaning. Suddenly, the old words rang out with new significance. What is the chief purpose of a bell? To ring out praises and enjoy God forever. Amen. And is it so different for us other ding-a-lings? We've been hearing from Pastor Sarah about inviting people to come to church. And all it takes is a chance to say, "Hey, why don't you come see what we have and what we have to offer? You might like it." It just might be something that someone needs to hear because they're hurting and they're sad and they need something that will help them feel closer to God and feel better about themselves. Amen. Bye, church.